I have lived many years with silence pressed against my chest like a medal I never earned. My grandchildren think of me as an old soldier, worn out but proud, the kind who simply did his duty and returned home. They know nothing of what I saw in 1986. How could they? No one was ever supposed to know. You see, comrades, history only tells half the truth. It speaks of radiation, of graphite fires, of men in white suits who rushed into the blaze and paid with their lives. It speaks of numbers, thousands of liquidators, countless tons of lead and sand dropped from helicopters, endless measurements of rads and sieverts. But what history does not tell you is that there was more than radiation inside Chernobyl. Much more. That is the part one carry. I was 26 years old when the orders came. A sergeant in the Soviet Army, 105th Motor Rifle Division, stationed outside Kiev. On the morning of May 2nd, 1986, I was summoned by my company commander. His face was pale, his voice taut, the way a man speaks when he repeats words given from above, but does not understand them. I was told I would be transferred immediately to a special detachment, classified mission urgent. All I was given to carry was my AK-74, 3 full magazines, a gas mask, and a standard issue dosimeter that rattled when you shook it. No explanation, no briefing, just the order. You are now assigned as a liquidator. That word, liquidator, was one I had not heard before. It meant we were sent to contain, to clean, to erase. In Chernobyl, it meant more than anyone told us. We boarded trucks, canvas covers flapping as the convoy rolled north. Young men, most of us barely beyond boyhood, all with cropped hair, polished boots, and eyes that still carried some spark of belief in the system. Some joked to hide their nerves, others smoked in silence. The only thing we knew came from rumors, a fire at a nuclear plant, some kind of technical accident. Officially, it was minor. Unofficially, the rush in their voices told a different story. I remember the moment we passed the checkpoints into the zone. Soldiers with rifles inspected our papers, waved Geiger counters over the trucks, then waved us through. The dosimeter on my chest began to chatter the instant we crossed. Not clicks, but a steady drone. I tapped it, thinking it was broken. It wasn't. We were told we would work in shifts, clearing debris, decontaminating equipment, evacuating civilians. It sounded simple, but as we entered Pripyat, the worker city built for the reactor, I felt my stomach knot. Pripyat was empty. Not just quiet, but empty in a way that felt wrong. Windows hung open, curtains drifting in the breeze. Half-eaten meals sat on tables. Dolls lay on the pavement, dropped mid-play. A Ferris wheel stood frozen, its seats creaking in the wind. Though it had never been used, the May Day festival was only days away. It was a city evacuated in hours, but it looked like it had been abandoned for centuries. Even then, I sensed something was off. Radiation cannot move furniture. Radiation cannot rearrange shadows. And yet, as we marched through the streets, I swore the angles of the buildings shifted when I looked away, that the sound of our boots echoed twice, like someone else was following. But I said nothing. A soldier does not speak of shadows when his comrades are listening. That night, in the barracks they had set up for us, I lay awake while the others snored. The sound of the Geiger counters did not stop. The clicking was constant, like teeth chattering in the dark. And beneath it, softer than a whisper, I thought I heard voices. Not Russian, not Ukrainian, not anything I knew. The first night was when I realized this was not just about radiation. Something else had been released. I tell you this now not for glory, not for pity. I tell you because the secret has eaten through me worse than the radiation ever could. You must understand, comrades, the true horror of Chernobyl was not in the atom, but in what the atom unlocked. And I a simple Soviet soldier, was sent there to see it. They told us we were heroes. That word was repeated so often it became meaningless. A line from a propaganda film recited, "To keep our boots moving." Heroes of the motherland. The officer barked as we assembled at dawn, rifles slung, faces still hollow from too little sleep. The state calls upon you to cleanse the disaster. History will remember you. History, I have since learned, remembers very little. Our orders were given in clipped sentences, the way all classified missions were. We were not to speak of what we saw to anyone, not even to each other outside official duty. No letters home, no questions. We were told that the reactor fire was already contained, but the surrounding area needed stabilization. That word again, like containment, like liquidator. It was a mask for what could not be explained. We loaded into the trucks, canvas covers pulled tight overhead, and the convoy rolled north. The smell of oil and dust hung in the air. I sat with my rifle across my knees, wedged between Anton and Mikhail, two men I had trained with since conscription. Anton was a believer, always quoting from the party speeches. Mikhail was a joker, his voice carrying too loudly in every barracks he entered. "I wonder if we'll get medals for this," Mikhail said, chewing a cigarette he couldn't light. "Imagine, Order of Lenin for cleaning ash." Anton shook his head. "It is not about medals. It is about sacrifice." I said nothing. My dosimeter lay heavy in my chest pocket, silent for now. As the convoy neared the zone, checkpoints grew more frequent. Soldiers in gas masks stopped us, scanned our papers, then waved strange devices over the trucks, Geiger counters. Their clicking began faint, intermittent. By the time we passed final barrier, the clicking was nearly constant, a nervous chatter beneath the hum of the engines. That was the first time I felt the weight of what we were entering. Radiation was not visible, not tangible, but its presence was announced by that endless click, 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 like the tapping of unseen fingers on the steel walls of the truck. The roads grew emptier. Villages abandoned in haste, windows broken, doors swinging open. Laundry still hung on lines, stiff in the breeze. Chickens scattered in the dust as we passed, yet no people appeared to claim them. It was as though an invisible hand had plucked every soul from the land and left only shadows behind. Then came Pripyat. We entered through wide boulevards lined with tall apartment blocks. From a distance, the city looked intact, untouched. But as we drew closer, the illusion crumbled. Windows gaped like missing teeth. Curtains billowed outward in the wind. Doors hung open, revealing rooms half lived in, half forgotten. I remember a dining table we passed on the second floor of a building, plates still set, bowls filled with soup hardened into crust. Children's shoes lay in pairs by the door, as though their owners would return any moment. But they never did. The Ferris wheel stood in the central square, tall and skeletal, its seats hanging still. It had been built for the May Day festival, scheduled only days after the disaster. The wheel had never carried laughter, never spun with joy. It had become, instead, a monument to abandonment. The men tried to mask their unease with jokes. "Looks like everyone ran off without paying the bill," Mikhail said, peering into an empty cafe where chairs still sat upright. Anton crossed himself, a habit he had poorly from the officers, for faith was discouraged. "This place is wrong," he muttered. None of us argued. We felt it too. The silence was immense. No traffic, no voices, not even the hum of electricity. Just the distant moan of wind through hollow buildings and the constant chatter of our dosimeters. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence after something terrible has already happened. And then came the first anomaly. It began with the dogs. Strays roamed the city, thin and desperate, their ribs sharp beneath mangy fur. But instead of scattering from us, they circled. Not in packs, not in aggression, but in strange, looping patterns, always clockwise, never stopping, their eyes glassy as though they looked at something beyond us. One of the men tossed a crust of bread to a mutt that lingered near. The dog did not eat it. It only kept circling. Then the birds. A flock of starlings lifted suddenly from the trees, black specks swirling in the sky. They climbed higher, turned, and then, without warning, half of them dropped dead mid-flight, striking rooftops, pavement, and glass with dull thuds. We froze, rifles raised as though against an enemy, though none was there. Radiation, the lieutenant muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. We wanted to believe him, but deep down, even on that first day, we knew radiation could not explain everything. Creepy was empty of people, but it was not empty. It watched us. I felt it then, though I could not yet name it. The city itself was alive in some terrible way. Orders came swiftly and without explanation. By the third day in the zone, we were assigned to the tasks that would define our role as liquidators. Clearing debris from the reactor rooftop, digging trenches for contaminated soil, bulldozing irradiated earth into temporary mounds, and carrying radioactive materials in metal containers that were supposed to shield us. Our protective gear was extensive, at least on paper. Full-body suits of thick canvas lined with plastic, rubber boots, gloves double-layered, and respirators with charcoal filters. The officers assured us that it would suffice for brief exposure, but the first hour on the reactor grounds made me doubt every word. The sun bored down like a furnace. Heat radiated not from the sky, but from the broken reactor itself. Even through the layers of clothing, through the respirator, I could feel it. A creeping burn, deep in the chest and behind the eyes, like the world had become molten and the air itself wanted to consume me. We worked in teams, following strict rotations. Every 20 minutes, we swapped out. Every 20 minutes, someone new was sent to the front. The metal clanged under our boots, the concrete cracked, and the graphite blocks shifted like slow-moving tectonics beneath our hands. Each swing of the shovel, each lift of a container, made the suits heavier, the radiation hotter, and the sense of dread grow. And then there were the shadows. I noticed them first while carrying debris to the south mound. A soldier stepped into my line of sight, but his shadow lingered behind a pile of rubble, stretching unnaturally long, flickering independently of the sun. When I blinked, it vanished. I mentioned it to Anton, but he laughed it off, saying my mind was fried already. But I wasn't imagining it. Mikhail swore he saw movement along the reactor edge, figures that were taller than men, gliding across the steel beams in ways that defied balance. I could swear they were walking in midair, he said, voice tight, glancing nervously at the others. We buried those whispers, as we did with fear, behind grim jokes and short bursts of laughter. Watch out for the ghosts, Misha, someone called while we carried rubble. But at night, when the sun sank behind the charred horizon, the jokes died. Night in the zone was different. There were no normal city lights, no stars visible beyond the dust and smoke. But near the reactor, strange lights began to flicker. Not electricity, not fire, but pulses of pale green and violet that shimmered across the skeletal steel. They were faint, distant, yet somehow purposeful, as though someone, or something, was arranging them. During a night shift on the reactor roof, I saw Levin, my comrade, freeze suddenly, his head tilted, scanning the empty city below. I called his name. No response. I stepped closer. "Did you see that?" he whispered finally, voice tight. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" "Children laughing," he said, almost inaudible, like he was speaking from far away. "Inside the buildings, behind the walls. They're still here." I thought he was hallucinating. Perhaps the stress, the heat, the radiation. But then I heard it too. Faint, soft, high-pitched. Not loud enough to call attention, but unmistakable. Laughter. Children playing somewhere in the empty, abandoned city. Levin's eyes were wide, glassy. "We have to check," he said. "No," I snapped. "Do not move from the roof. Whatever it is, it's not human." He hesitated, then nodded, but I could see the tremor in his hands. The laughter had stopped, just as suddenly as it began, leaving the zone heavier, darker, filled with a silence that pressed into the ears. The next day, Mikhail refused to go back to the same trench. He claimed he had felt small hands brushing my arms in the soil. We laughed, trying to convince ourselves it was nerves, though none of us slept properly anymore. Even the animals we saw seemed to behave oddly. One dog had followed us from the edge of the forest, its gait jerky and wrong, paws landing unevenly. Birds hovered over us, wings trembling unnaturally, then dropped dead mid-flight without warning. During the cleanup, time began to blur. The sun would rise and fall, but I could not tell the hours apart. Shadows lengthened and shifted independently, sometimes disappearing altogether, leaving the world stark, empty, yet watching. By the end of the first week of operations, the soldiers were exhausted, faces gaunt, lips cracked, hands trembling. The suits offered protection against the radiation, they said, but nothing could shield us from the weight of what we were seeing, or the quiet understanding that the zone itself had a presence, and it was aware. Even the reactor's ruins seemed to breathe. Every movement of debris, every spark of light from our torches, felt observed, catalogued, and measured. And so we continued, silent and wary, our tasks methodical, our conversations clipped, laughter forced, because the first operations taught us one lesson that would last for the next months. In Chernobyl, survival was not about skill, orders, or courage. It was about paying attention, watching, listening, and even then, it might not be enough. The zone grows stranger with each passing day. At first, we tried to rationalize the anomalies, shadows shifting where none should, whispers in empty corridors, laughter of children when none remained. But by the fourth day of operations, rationalization became impossible. It began during a routine patrol along the perimeter of the reactor's debris field. Mist hung low over the ground, so dense it clung to our boots and seeped into our masks. The Geiger counters clicked frantically, needles spiking as if the air itself had thickened. I knew the radiation levels well. This reading was impossible. No known reactor leak could cause spikes this precise, this localized, without something moving between the readings. And that's when I saw them. Humanoid shapes, tall and thin, moving across the fog. Their motion was wrong, too fluid, too precise, bending at angles a human skeleton should not allow. They stepped over rubble and through debris as if weight and gravity did not apply. They did not speak, did not make sound, and yet they were unmistakably aware of us. When I raised my rifle, the nearest figure turned its head, slowly, methodically, as though measuring my reaction. The Geiger counters screamed. Needle slammed into maximum, then dipped back, then spiked again with every movement of the shapes. Mikhail swore the figures flickered at the edges of his vision, sometimes merging with walls, then suddenly standing clear again. Anton muttered prayers under his breath, crossing himself repeatedly, whispering that the zone had taken form before our eyes. We tried to convince ourselves. Hallucinations, fatigue, radiation sickness. After all, our rations were scarce, our sleep fragmented, and the sun's light was filtered through smoke and ash that never dissipated. Perhaps the mind constructs monsters when survival instincts clash with fear. But some things cannot be explained. Our patrol dog, a sturdy shepherd named Bronick, refused to enter a partially collapsed building. His hackles rose, teeth bared, growling at a corner of darkness where nothing appeared. We tried to coax him forward with commands, with the smell of rationed meat, even with strikes on his flank. He would not budge, barking frantically at air, eyes locked on a wall as though it had teeth. Then it happened to Yashin. He was a young recruit, pale and restless, already shaking from the heat and exhaustion of the previous days. I saw him step into a corridor inside the reactor's maintenance annex. He froze mid-step, eyes wide, hands trembling on the handle of his rifle. I called his name. No response. I ran to him. His lips moved soundlessly for a moment. Then he turned to me. His face that was gone. Not bruised, not bloody, not burned. Just gone. Smooth and featureless, pale as porcelain. He screamed, the sound cracking, then doubled over and vomited. Only it was not bile. It was blood, thick and metallic. The man with no face. He croaked between heaves, voice trembling. I saw him inside behind the wall. I put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Others gathered around, their faces pale, disbelief etched into their features. But none spoke. None dared. After that incident, morale began to fray. Orders became suggestions. Soldiers no longer joked to mask unease. They barely spoke at all. Every shadow, every flicker of movement set nerves on edge. Each shift on the reactor's debris field felt like stepping into the teeth of a predator, unseen but fully aware of our presence. Even the officers, usually pillars of command, grew quiet. Lieutenant Pavlov would stand in the mist for minutes at a time, staring at the horizon as though reading some script only he could see. When asked questions, he gave clipped, meaningless replies, his voice low and wavering. I began to notice the subtle things. A shadow that lingered where none should be. A corridor that seemed longer from one day to the next. Items misplaced even though the building was abandoned. The Geiger counters would spike at random intervals, often without physical explanation, as if whatever lurked in the fog was feeding on the very energy of the zone itself. By the fifth night, sleep had become impossible. My mind replayed Yashin's face again and again. Smooth, featureless, yet alive in some impossible sense. The others murmured in their sleep, talking about the man with no face, about lights that moved against the wind, about whispers from behind closed doors. And so, standing at the edge of the debris field, the wind whipping ash and dust into our eyes, I realized that something in the zone had noticed us. Perhaps it had always been here, waiting. Perhaps the explosion had only awakened it. We were no longer soldiers. We were intruders, trespassing into a place that had never been meant for human eyes. And what we saw, what we were beginning to see, would not be forgotten. Orders came early, before dawn. Our detachment was to move deeper into the abandoned city, into the apartment blocks that still held traces of lives abruptly ended. The official directive was simple. Secure documents, any valuables, anything that could be deemed important to the state. Nothing more, nothing less. We moved in squads of 4, rifles ready, flashlights cutting thin beams through the dust-filled air. Our boots echoed across the empty streets, rattling against broken pavement and shattered glass. The buildings rose before us, concrete skeletons of human ambition, windows staring like hollow eyes. Entering the first apartment block, I was struck by how time seemed suspended. Kitchens bore rusted pots, half-rotted bread on countertops, and utensils scattered as if their owners had been called away for a single moment they never returned from. Televisions, once bright and brash, now lay blackened and cracked, screens distorted by heat. the circuitry exposed like the entrails of a corpse. The squad moved silently, flashlights sweeping across peeling wallpaper and overturned furniture. Mikhail muttered something about the smell, acrid, metallic, sweet, like copper mixed with decay. But none of us replied. Smells had begun to define the zone almost as much as sight. It started subtly at first. Footsteps from above. Not ours, not echoes of our own boots, but distinct, deliberate, descending the stairwell from an upper floor. I froze, trained instinct screaming at me. Every muscle taut. The others froze too, rifles raised, ears straining. We called out, "Who's there?" No answer, only silence, only the occasional creak of old wood. We proceeded cautiously, and then the toys began to move. Dolls that lay sprawled on the floor would shift slightly when we passed. Wooden horses rotated on their axles. A single block toppled across the floor as though pushed by unseen fingers. Mikhail whispered that it was the wind, but the building had no air current, no broken windows in that stairwell. The movement was precise, deliberate, and then came the radios. Even switched off, even unplugged, the static hissed faintly in our ears. My respirator should have blocked sound, but there it was, low, whispering buzz, almost forming words I could not comprehend. Anton's face drained of color. "It's speaking," he muttered, but not in Russian. We pressed on, though morale was fraying. Soldiers joked quietly to mask their unease, but even the bravest among us walked slower, shuffling through the apartments like men stepping through a tomb. Then panic struck. One soldier, Yashin, froze in a hallway as something moved in the corner of his vision, a shadow stretching along the wall, impossibly long, bending unnaturally. He raised his rifle and fired. A single shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Silence followed, thicker than before. We waited, hearts pounding, until the echo of the gun faded. Nothing emerged from the darkness, yet the walls were not as they had been. Black burn marks marred the plaster, jagged and fresh, as if something had pressed against them with invisible hands. Not a single bullet had left a mark, yet the wall bore the evidence of violence. Yashin's hand shook uncontrollably. It was right there, he stammered, voice breaking. A man, no face. Eyes missing, mouth gone. I swear it. We tried to calm him, but words fell flat against the weight of the building, the oppressive silence, and the unshakable sense that something was observing us. Even our dosimeters were erratic. They clicked in strange rhythms, the needles twitching wildly without consistent radiation levels. It was as if the zone itself measured us, as if our fear, our heartbeat, our very presence was being recorded. We retreated from that first block quietly, shadows seeming to cling to our heels, moving just beyond the reach of flashlight beams. The streets outside were empty, yet every echo suggested we were followed. By the end of the operation, no one spoke much. Our mission was technically a success. We secured a handful of documents, a few scattered valuables, but the real impact could not be recorded in inventory. We had seen that the city was not empty. It was a vessel, alive in ways our minds could not fully grasp. And in the days that followed, I could not shake the burn marks. Jagged black lines on plaster walls, always present in our memories, always haunting the edges of our vision. No explanation, no report could account for them. We were soldiers. We followed orders. But even the strongest among us had begun to understand that the zone had its own rules, that the city did not belong to us, that our presence had been noticed, and it had not been pleased. The work on the reactor rooftop was unlike anything I had endured before. We were assigned to remove graphite chunks, the irradiated remnants of the core itself. The officers called a critical cleanup, a task of utmost urgency. Among ourselves, we called it the biorobot's job, because only a machine, or a man-turned-machine, could endure it without collapsing. Our suits, thick and cumbersome, were supposed to protect us. In theory. In practice, they became ovens. The heat radiating from the damaged reactor was unbearable, invisible yet almost tangible, pressing against the skin beneath layers of canvas and plastic. My gloves became soggy with sweat. Every shovel swing felt like lifting lead. Every step along the steel rooftop required the strength of desperation rather than muscle. Dosimeters screamed in response to every graphite chunk we lifted. They rattled in our pockets, the needles jerking violently, digits on the displays, flickering like static on a broken television. The radiation was immense, yet measured in numbers our instruments could barely record. And yet, it was not just numbers. It was awareness. Something about the heat, the vibration of the counters, the way the graphite clinked and slid. It felt alive. I was shoveling a pile near the edge when I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, walking along the reactor rim. Its movements were smooth, almost gliding, yet deliberate. It emitted a faint glow, pale as ash, barely perceptible against the gray light of the wasteland. I froze mid-shovel. My squad froze with me, eyes darting to the creature, but no one spoke. "Do not speak of what you saw," barked Lieutenant Pavlov, voice tight, eyes wide beneath his helmet. Understood. We nodded, our throats dry, hearts hammering. It was not a suggestion. Silence was an order. The officers wanted the work done, but they wanted the sightings unspoken. Perhaps they had seen it before, or perhaps the party had decided that some truths were better left unrecorded. The figure walked slowly along the edge, bending in ways no human skeleton should allow. It paused as if aware of us, then moved again, a whisper of motion. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. I could not tell if it had vanished or if my mind had tricked me. We returned to the laborious task, shoveling chunks of graphite into containers, each piece weighing heavily not just with material but with menace. Each movement burned the body and strained the mind, but no one complained aloud. Complaints would invite attention, and attention would awaken whatever lingered. By mid-afternoon, I noticed one of the newer recruits, Levin, showing signs of distress. His hands shook uncontrollably, his face pale beneath the mask. Sweat ran along the nape of his neck, yet he could not remove the layers. He mumbled to himself, digits, sequences, names, in a low, almost chanting voice. The tall one, the numbers they are speaking. I approached him, but the other men pulled me back. Lieutenant Pavlov's eyes warned me. Hands off, or be next. We all watched as Levin collapsed, shivering violently, skin developing strange lesions, red, blistered, patches spreading across his arms and neck beneath the gloves and suit. He muttered incoherently about the tall one whispering numbers before vomiting violently into the metal trough we used for discarded debris. The rest of us were silent, fear pressed against our ribs, our masks stifling our breaths, but not our panic. After the incident, the officers ordered us to continue. Work could not stop. We shoveled graphite until dusk. The rooftop bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun, though the radiation lighted the mist around us with an unnatural shimmer. Shadows stretched impossibly long, folding over themselves. The wind carried whispers, unintelligible yet precise, like the counting of data, the calculation of inevitabilities. We spoke little that night in the barracks. Levin was quarantined, but I knew what we all felt. The zone was no longer a place we could measure with instruments, no longer a task to be accomplished by shovels and lead containers. Something was watching, cataloging, learning from our movements. And the tall one, whatever it was, had marked its presence. Even now, I remember that rooftop, the wave of graphite in my hands, the glow along the rim, the whispers that sounded like numbers and warnings. I remember thinking, for the first time with real clarity, that the radiation was not the deadliest threat. Whatever lived in that ruin, whatever moved in ways we could not perceive, was far older, far wiser, far crueler than we had been prepared to understand. That night, the zone became a living thing. I have replayed it in my mind countless times, each detail etched with a clarity that nightmares alone cannot provide. We had set up camp on the edge of the reactor compound, a temporary barracks of metal shipping containers and tarps designed to shield us from wind and debris. The dosimeters were constant companions, clicking softly in the pre-dawn darkness. I remember thinking the night would be like any other, long, tense, but survivable. Then the fog came. It rolled in from the direction of the reactor, thick and unnatural, black as spilled ink. Visibility dropped to zero within minutes. The first men to notice it were shouting, but their voices were swallowed instantly by the oppressive silence that followed. There was no wind. There was no natural explanation. The fog moved with purpose, curling around the containers, slipping under doors, creeping over our boots as though alive. Shapes appear inside it, sometimes humanoid, sometimes not. Just glimpses at first, elongated limbs stretching unnaturally, shadows folding in on themselves, faint glimmers where faces should have been. I could hear whispers, not words, not Russian, not anything recognizable. The sound pressed into our skulls, vibrating through teeth and bones. Then the screams began. Yashin's voice first, high-pitched, frantic, calling out for someone to help, though we could not see him. Then others joined in, overlapping, as men ran blindly into the fog, rifles firing erratically. I fired once, twice, but my bullet struck nothing, or at least nothing visible. I saw him, the tall, thin figure from the reactor rooftop, moving through the blackness with impossible speed. It didn't walk. It glided, bending through the fog like smoke-given form. Its glow was dim but undeniable, cutting through the darkness in a way that burned my eyes when I tried to focus. One by one, I watched comrades dragged into the mist by unseen forces. Arms reached for them and disappeared into nothing. Their screams grew fainter as they vanished. There was no struggle, only terror and the snapping of air that could not be explained. I clutched my rifle, shaking, trying to move, but the black fog seemed to resist my steps, clinging to the fabric of my suit, to my boots, slowing me as though the zone itself were aware of my intent to flee. The dosimeter in my chest began to scream, but not in the pattern I had come to understand. It dropped to near zero as the fog enveloped us, then spiked violently every time a shape passed too close. Somehow, I made it to the edge of camp, stumbling over debris and the bodies of the men who had been pulled out first. I could hear the echoes of their fear, the sound of their blood pounding in veins still warm in the dirt. My heart felt like it would explode, each beat hammering against ribs already strained with terror. By morning, the fog had receded, leaving only the whisper of wind across the ash-strewn ground. The sun revealed the devastation. Half of our squad was gone. Their tents lay empty, dosimeters smashed, rifles abandoned. Blackened footprints traced the paths where the fog had dragged them into nothingness. The official report was simple: radiation fatalities. But we all knew better. Radiation does not drag men screaming into the mist. Radiation does not bend shadows to snatch the living. Radiation does not whisper numbers you cannot comprehend. Radiation does not leave scorch marks on walls shaped like human hands. We buried what could be buried. The rest, there were no remains. Nothing. Only empty boots, helmets scattered, and the oppressive sense that the zone had taken them wholly. That night changed us irrevocably. No one joked. No one laughed. Even the officers, normally pillars of unyielding discipline, walked with eyes darting to the treeline, to the edge of fog, to the ruins where the reactor hummed like a wounded beast. I slept little. Every creak of the containers, every whisper of wind, became a threat. I began to understand that the zone had rules, and we were trespassers. We had obeyed orders, but it did not matter. The zone had its own logic, its own definitions of what was alive and what was to be claimed. By the time the sun rose fully, washing the exclusion zone in pale, sickly light, I was alone with half of my squad. The black fog left behind an imprint on my mind, not just of the missing men, but of the certainty that the zone was aware, and it was patient. I write this now as an old man, decades later, yet I remember that night as though it happened yesterday. The black fog is alive in my dreams, returning with the screams, the whispers, and the knowledge that once you are marked by the zone, you are never truly free. Then I saw it, the tall, faceless figure, standing at the edge of the Pripyat Central Square, backlit by the dim glow of ruined street lamps, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, motionless yet aware. Its presence carried weight, an oppressive certainty. I could feel it, a gravitational pull of attention, a silent command. My skin crawled beneath the layers of my jacket, my heartbeat thundered. I moved cautiously, each step a negotiation between curiosity and terror. The whispers intensified, now forming words I could almost understand. Come back, finish what you began. The voices of my dead comrades, the black fog of memory coalescing into near-tangible forms. Their faces, distorted and pale, appeared at the edges of buildings, beckoning, pleading, accusing. The zone was alive again, shaping itself around me, testing me. I stumbled into the reactor ruins, torchlight reflecting off twisted metal and scarred concrete. Shadows stretched and folded unnaturally across walls and debris. Every instinct told me to stop, but I forced myself to walk, guided by both terror and memory. Then the faceless figure moved, gliding silently toward me. The air thickened, vibrating with a low hum. My dosimeter, long silent, sprang to life, needles jerking violently as though recording not radiation, but fear itself. My legs refused to carry me fast enough. The whispers became screams, voices overlapping, calling me to step closer into the reactor, promising reunion, understanding release. I nearly faltered. Every rational thought was swallowed by the siren call of the zone, the hope that I could reconnect with the lost, uncover what had happened, make sense of the unexplainable. But in that instant, a memory slammed into me. The hospital, the burns, the black fog, the whispers that never ended. This was not salvation. This was a trap. I turned, forcing my body to move faster, away from the ruins, away from the faceless watcher, away from the imploring voices of the dead. The zone reacted instantly. Shadows lengthened to claw at me. Branches reached unnaturally from twisted trees, and the ground seemed to shift beneath my boots. The whispers screamed, then faded into an oppressive silence, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. By the time I reached the edge of the city, dawn was brushing pale light across the horizon. Pripyat was silent once more, yet the sense of being watched lingered, a weight pressing into my chest. I had survived, but I was changed. The zone had not ended. It had simply paused, waiting for the next intrusion. I carried notebooks filled with data, sketches, and observations. But the real burden was the truth itself. The zone was alive, sentient, patient, and inescapable. It remembered, it calculated, and it claimed. I had seen it. I had survived it, and yet I knew that one day it would call again. Walking away, I realized that the zone was not merely a disaster, not merely radiation, not merely human error. It was a testament to things beyond comprehension, things that humanity was never meant to face. And for those of us who had glimpsed it, the memory would never leave. I sit now in a small, dimly lit room, decades removed from the blackened streets of Pripyat, the reactor ruins, and the black fog that claimed so many. My hands tremble as I hold a notebook, pages yellowed, filled with sketches, observations, and fragments of memory too vivid to ignore. Time has worn me down, but has not washed away the zone, nor the things I witnessed there. I am old, weary, a relic of a Soviet past that demanded obedience above humanity, that sacrificed men as though they were parts in a machine. My body bears the scars, the lesions, the burns that never healed completely, and yet the deepest wounds are in the mind, in the memory that refuses to release me. Sometimes I dream of the zone, not the desolate ruins, not the charred concrete or twisted steel, but the machinery of it all. Not just the reactor, with its relentless hum of energy and death, but the state, the military, even history itself. Machines that consumed lives methodically, efficiently, like graphite in the core, like soldiers on a rooftop. Men were expendable cogs. Orders were gears grinding forward, heedless of fear, loss, or morality. I think of the young men in my squad, Levin, Yashin, Mikhail, and the others who vanished into the black fog. They were not just victims of radiation. They were consumed by a system that demanded conformity and obedience, then abandoned them to forces it could not, or would not acknowledge. The Soviet machine operated with precision and secrecy, and the zone fed on that precision, turning it into something else entirely. Yet the reactor itself, the ruins we cleaned, the graphite we shoveled, held another horror entirely. Something inhuman, something awakened by the explosion, the abandonment, the very presence of men who trespassed where they should not. It was not alive in a biological sense. It was an intelligence, pattern, a shadow consciousness shaped by energy, radiation, and despair. It learned, it remembered, it observed. It was patient, and when we stumbled into its domain, when we laughed, shouted, or feared, it reacted. I have spent years trying to reconcile these truths. Books, reports, studies, none capture the feeling of being watched by something that defies physics, logic, and understanding. The black fog, the faceless figure, the whispers, they were not hallucinations. They were proofs that some elements of the zone had awakened something older, something that had no language, no morality, and no interest in our survival. And yet, the most terrifying truth is this: the zone reflects what we bring to it. Our fear, our orders, our history of compliance and obedience. The machines of men, the state, the army, the reactor, even bureaucracy, create the conditions for something else to emerge. They build not just structures, but prisons, incubators for horror that the human mind cannot contain. I look in the mirror now. My hair is white, my back stooped, my hands shake, and yet, when I close my eyes, I hear it still, the faint, irregular click of a Geiger counter, echoing from memory, from the ruins, from somewhere the zone never lets go. But sometimes, and more unsettlingly, it is not the Geiger counter. Sometimes, I hear the children laughing, not a memory of my own childhood, not the laughter of men alive and safe, but the laughter of the lost, of the vanished, of what was taken or awakened within the zone. It rises from the ruins, distant yet intimately close, and reminds me that the zone is patient, intelligent, and eternal. It is a place where machines, both human and inhuman, consume lives and memories without remorse. I think often of the words I never spoke, the reports I never filed, the secrets I carry in silence. The state demanded denial. History demands it as well. But memory, stubborn and inescapable, insists otherwise. So here I sit, old and broken, a man who survived not because of strength or courage, but because I resisted once, just once, the lure of the zone. I fled into the night, carrying the burden of truth, and even now, it weighs heavier than any dosimeter ever could. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the Geiger counter clicking, but sometimes it's the children laughing, and I do not know which is worse.